In the summer of 2007, one of Glacier National Park's most experienced park guides and her trusted horse vanished without a trace along a trail she had walked hundreds of times before. No distress call, no blood, not even a single hoofprint left behind. The disappearance quickly spiraled into a nightmare, one of those wilderness mysteries where not everything lost is ever found. Her family waited in anguish. Search teams combed the terrain for weeks, but like so many vanishings swallowed by nature, silence eventually settled in. Then, 10 years later, an unexpected discovery by a group of ecology students, a cracked, weathered saddle emerging from deep snow in a remote mountain ravine, shook the story loose from its long sleep. The saddle belonged to Shadow, Emily Thorne's black mare, but there was no sign of Emily herself, no body, no clear explanation, just fragments, strange, scattered clues, and a much darker question than before. If this is where her horse collapsed, then where did Emily go? And why? This story isn't just about a woman who vanished. It's about how the land keeps its secrets, about how even the most seasoned outdoorswoman can disappear in a place she knew like the back of her hand. Tonight, we'll retrace Emily's final known steps through forest, snow, and silence, and explore what might have happened in those final moments when the trail simply stopped. Emily Thorne was 37 years old the summer she disappeared. She wasn't just any park guide, she was a Glacier veteran. Over 15 years of backcountry experience, a calm presence in dangerous terrain, a steady voice that tourists and rangers alike trusted. She lived in a modest log cabin just outside the west entrance of the park. No television, no internet. Just her horse, Shadow, a black quarter horse with a silver blaze down his nose, and a bookshelf filled with journals, maps, and stories of the wild. Emily knew these mountains better than most people know their own neighborhoods. The Iceberg Lake Trail, the switchbacks up to Grinnell Glacier, the unmarked deer paths through the spruce forest. These weren't just routes to her. They were memories. She had walked them in snow, under thunderstorms, in total darkness. She wasn't reckless. She didn't take chances. Shadow had been her companion for nearly a decade. He was calm under pressure and sure-footed on even the rockiest terrain. When people talked about Emily, they always mentioned the two of them together as if they were one. The 18th of July, 2007, started like any other summer morning in Glacier. Clear skies, dry air, a temperature that would soon creep into the 82nd. Emily had planned a solo ride that day, routine trail inspection before the weekend rush. She checked in with park headquarters just before 8 a.m., noting that she'd be heading north toward the Ptarmigan Trail system. It wasn't uncommon for her to ride alone. She preferred it. It gave her time to observe trail conditions, watch wildlife, and make mental notes for future patrols. She wore her usual gear, khaki shirt, forest green ranger vest, wide-brimmed hat, and a purple scarf tied loosely around her neck. By noon, radio contact had gone quiet. No one noticed at first. Emily had always been a bit of a loner, often choosing to camp overnight if needed. But when the sun dipped behind the ridgeline and she still hadn't checked back in, unease began to settle over the station. At 9:17 p.m., a message was sent out to all park personnel. No contact from E. Thorne. Last known heading, North Ptarmigan. If spotted, advise immediately. By morning, a search had begun. The setting of Glacier National Park is breathtaking and unforgiving. Over 1 million acres of towering peaks, deep valleys, glacial lakes, and ancient pine forests. It is one of the most remote and rugged places in the lower 48 states. One wrong step, one missed trail marker, and the terrain can swallow a person whole. Emily knew that, and yet she vanished into it anyway. What came next was one of the most extensive search operations in the park's history. But what they found was nothing. And sometimes, nothing is more terrifying than what you can see. The 18th of July, 2007. The morning sun rose over the jagged peaks of Glacier, painting the valleys in warm amber light. Emily Thorne saddled up Shadow just before 7:30 a.m., the air still cool and quiet. She strapped her pack behind the saddle basic trail supplies, first aid kit, radio, journal, extra rations. She tucked a purple scarf under the collar of her ranger vest, mounted up, and rode out of the back lot behind her cabin. It was routine, almost boring, the kind of day she'd lived 100 times before. A colleague remembered seeing her riding north past the visitor center, waving casually, her hat tipped low against the morning glare. No one thought much of it. Emily always preferred to patrol alone, and she always came back. But this time, she didn't. By late afternoon, when she still hadn't radioed in her trail report, staff assumed she'd found a downed tree or blockage and was running behind. At 6 p.m., the ranger station made their first call-out. No response. At 9 p.m., her absence was flagged as unusual. By midnight, it was labeled a potential incident. And by sunrise on the 19th of July, Glacier's full search and rescue team was activated. They started at the logical points, trailheads, common rest stops, known hazards. Helicopters swept the valleys. Search dogs tracked her most recent route. Volunteers walked shoulder to shoulder through dense alpine brush. For days, they combed the North Ptarmigan region, but there was no sign of a person or a horse. No broken branches, no boot prints, no dropped gear. Even Shadow, whose horseshoes should have left visible markings along the dusty trail, had vanished without a trace. It didn't make sense. Emily knew those trails like family, and if something had gone wrong, a twisted ankle, an animal encounter, she would have made contact. She knew how to use her radio. She knew how to shelter. She knew how to survive. And that, perhaps, was the most unsettling part. The first week passed with nothing. The second week brought only silence. Rumors began to swirl. Did she run away? Did she stage it? Was there someone waiting for her out there? Someone no one knew about? The official reports stuck to neutral language. Unknown cause, presumed lost, pending further evidence. But unofficially, the whispers grew louder. Rangers talked late at night about the eeriness of it all, the way nature sometimes closed around a person, as if it had never let them in to begin with. By the third week, the search scaled back. Volunteers left, helicopters stopped flying, and the forest, quiet again, returned to its rhythms. Emily's family didn't. Her father, Robert Thorne, a retired firefighter from Oregon, moved into her cabin for nearly 6 months. Every morning, he walked the same trails she once rode, calling her name. He left markers, bright orange flags, notes in waterproof bags, photos of her from when she was young. Hikers began spotting them in odd places, wedged into tree bark or tied to fence posts. "Have you seen Emily?" But the truth was, no one had. Not since that morning. In the winter of 2008, a snowstorm destroyed several of the trail markers Emily's father had placed. A ranger found 1 month later, half buried under pine needles near Iceberg Lake. Time was wearing the case down. Each season stripped away more traces. Each unanswered question felt heavier. Then came spring, then summer again, and still nothing. By 2009, Emily was officially declared missing, presumed deceased. The file was closed, her belongings boxed up, her horse Shadow listed as lost in field. The forest didn't remember, but her family did. What made her disappearance so haunting wasn't just the lack of evidence. It was the fact that she never should have been lost at all. She wasn't a tourist, she wasn't new to the terrain, she was Glacier's own. And yet, it was as if she had ridden into the trees and simply ceased to exist. For years, that was where the story ended. Until 10 years later, when something finally resurfaced from beneath the snow. In the years that followed Emily's disappearance, the forest held its silence. But outside Glacier, theories began to grow quietly at first, then louder, as the case gained attention beyond the ranger stations and local press. Her name became a soft echo in internet forums, in late-night radio shows about missing persons, and in the back corners of coffee shops where retired hikers talked about the ones who never came back. Some believed it was a simple tragedy, a misstep. One loose stone, one shift in Shadow's footing, and they both could have fallen down into a ravine no one had ever searched, buried under landslide or snowpack. Glacier was full of places like that, cracks in the earth that swallowed sound and light. But others weren't so sure. There were no signs of a fall, no torn cloth, no broken branches, nothing disturbed. It was the absence that unsettled people most, and so new theories took root. One said she staged it, that Emily had grown tired of her life and vanished by choice, that the wilderness offered a kind of escape few could ever afford. But those who knew her pushed back. She had no debt, no distress, no reason to run. Her journals were full of plans, summer hikes, trail improvements, weekend classes for young rangers. Nothing suggested a goodbye. Another theory suggested she wasn't alone, that someone had followed her into the park. A drifter maybe, a stranger who knew the terrain or had watched her from a distance. Glacier's borders are vast and largely unguarded. People slip in and out all the time. But again, there were no signs, no confrontation, no struggle, and no one matching any suspicious description was ever reported. Then there was the horse, Shadow. A large, visible animal with iron shoes. How does a horse vanish completely? Some said he was spooked and ran for miles, dying somewhere alone, out of range. Others believed Emily never made it past the first few miles, that something or someone stopped them early, and the rest was only imagined movement. A handful of online sleuths latched onto an older ranger's comment made during a press interview. He had said, almost in passing, "The woods don't always like to give back what they take." That quote, vague and poetic, began to spiral into stranger ideas. Paranormal forums speculated about time slips, disappearances into alternate terrain, energy vortexes hidden in the high alpine valleys. None of it had proof. But in a case with no answers, even the wildest ideas found footing. Emily became more than a person. She became a symbol of something unfinished. Her photograph, forest green vest, windswept hair, soft half-smile appeared in articles, podcasts, even murals near park entrances. Visitors would ask about her. Some swore they had seen her horse on distant ridgelines. Some said they heard a woman's voice calling from nowhere. But all of it, in the end, was just noise, unproven, unresolved. And the forest still held its breath. Until that morning in 2017, when a group of students trekking across a snowy saddle ridge stopped in their tracks and saw something sticking up from the snow. A shape, a curve, worn leather frozen in place. And everything changed again. The 12th of March, 2017. It had been almost exactly 10 years since Emily Thorne and her horse disappeared into the northern wilderness of Glacier National Park. Snow still blanketed the high trails, and most of the backcountry remained closed to the public. But a small team of graduate students from the University of Montana had been granted off-season access for a research project on seasonal migration routes of native elk herds. Accompanied by a backcountry ranger, They set out toward a rarely used ridgeline northeast of Ptarmigan Wall, a windswept, unforgiving stretch that even seasoned hikers avoided during winter. They were 4 days into the survey when it happened. The snow that morning was crusted and brittle, fractured under their boots with every step. The group moved in single file across a high saddle ridge, the wind sharp and constant. Visibility was fair. No one was expecting to find anything but tracks and scat. Then one of them, Sam Devereux, a quiet, second-year student, paused mid-step. About 10 yards ahead, something was jutting out of the snow, curved, dark. At first glance, it looked like a bent tree limb, half buried. But something about its shape wasn't quite right. Sam called the others over. They began to clear the snow with gloved hands, brushing layer after layer of ice and powder away. And then the silence fell. It was a saddle. Old, cracked. The leather was frayed and water-damaged, but parts of it had been preserved under the weight of ice and shadow. The metal stirrups were still intact. The girth strap had snapped, likely years ago. And on the underside, barely visible through mud and snow, they found a faded brand stamp. The serial number matched one issued by the Park Service in 1998. The saddle belonged to Shadow. Shock rippled through the group. Photos were taken, coordinates logged. The ranger radioed it in. Within 36 hours, a formal recovery team was on site, and the area was closed to the public. Nearby, just 20 feet downslope, scattered beneath a cluster of pine branches, were bones, partial, weathered, consistent with a horse's hindquarters and pelvis. Wildlife had likely disturbed the remains years ago, but some fragments were intact enough to identify. Forensic analysis would later confirm them. Shadow. Not far from the saddle, half covered in ice, they found fabric. A faded strip of purple wool, likely from a scarf. It matched the one Emily was last seen wearing. But there was no sign of her. Not a boot, not a button, not a single bone. The recovery team expanded their search area in a tight spiral pattern. For 5 days, they scanned the surrounding slopes, deployed thermal drones, dug test pits. Nothing. It was as if the saddle and the horse had fallen from the sky, dropped there without context or explanation. Geologists on site noted that the terrain where the saddle was found had likely experienced a slow-moving snowpack collapse years earlier, a sort of creeping avalanche that wouldn't have been visible or audible to anyone nearby. If Emily and Shadow had been caught in it, it could explain the burial. But that raised more questions than it answered. Why was only the horse found? Why had Emily's remains not surfaced with the thaw? A second item deepened the mystery. Roughly 2 kilometers to the southeast, a volunteer searcher following a natural drainage path spotted something unusual wedged between 2 rocks. It was a hair clip, copper-plated, old-fashioned, with a tiny mountain goat emblem etched on the side. Emily's sister later confirmed it. A personal item, a gift from their mother. She had worn it almost every day. That discovery baffled investigators. How did it end up so far from the saddle? Had Emily crawled away? Had she survived the initial incident and tried to find help, only to succumb to exposure or injury farther downslope? And if so, where was the rest of her? Speculation reignited overnight. The internet lit up. Maps were redrawn. Amateur sleuths began combing through satellite images, plotting out timelines, debating whether foul play could still be on the table. But no new answers came, only silence. And yet, something about the saddle felt final. A Park Service memo issued later that month used the phrase, "This discovery may represent the most conclusive evidence to date regarding the fate of Ranger Emily Thorne." But even then, it stopped short of closure, because without her, there could be no ending, only fragments. A saddle in the snow, a scarf in the ice, and a question that still echoed between the peaks. If this is where her horse died, then what path did Emily take? And why did no one ever find her? The saddle should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. A week after the discovery, while snow still blanketed most of the upper ridges, a second volunteer team, this time assigned to follow lower elevation runoff channels, found something else. It was lodged in a narrow crevice between two fallen boulders near a meltwater stream, almost hidden beneath a patch of moss and dead needles. A torn piece of canvas, no larger than a dinner plate. Embedded in the fibers was a rusted brass grommet standard issue from a field journal satchel used by the Park Service in the early 2000s. Field logs confirmed that Emily had been carrying such a satchel when she left that morning in 2007. The canvas fragment wasn't much, but it told a story. It suggested motion. Movement away from the saddle site, possibly downhill, possibly wounded. But again, the direction made little sense. It didn't lead toward any trailhead. It didn't follow known ranger routes. It was as if Emily had been walking into nowhere. Then came the final piece, perhaps the most haunting of all. 3 weeks after the saddle's discovery, a seasonal ranger cleaning debris near a weather station shelter on a lower slope came across a strip of paper, water-stained, molded along the edges. But part of it had survived. And, in shaky, pencil-smeared handwriting, were the final legible words. "Shadow won't get up, the wind won't stop, I can't feel my feet." No date, no signature, but the paper matched the same type found in ranger-issued notebooks, and the handwriting, according to her sister, was Emily's. It was a snapshot, a moment captured somewhere between fear and surrender. A woman alone in the snow, her horse dying beside her, the cold creeping into her bones. And yet, still, no one knows where she fell, where she laid down, where her story ended. Only that for one last moment, she was still writing, still hoping someone, someday, would read it. The snow eventually melted. The search teams went home. The students who had stumbled across the saddle returned to their classes. But for the people who had known Emily Thorne, time didn't move so neatly. Her cabin near the west entrance sat undisturbed for years, untouched except by wind and pine needles. Her father refused to sell it. He visited every the 18th of July, leaving behind a fresh scarf tied to the fence post, always purple, like the one she used to wear. Inside, her boots still rested by the door. Her favorite enamel mug stayed on the kitchen shelf. Her trail maps, carefully marked and annotated, remained spread across the small desk by the window. Dust covered everything, but nothing had been moved. It wasn't a shrine. It was simply a place paused in the moment before she left. Among rangers, her name became a quiet kind of legend. New recruits would ask about her. Old-timers would nod, offer a soft answer, then fall silent. No one ever forgot her face, serene, strong, always half smiling like she knew something others didn't. Every now and then, hikers reported strange sightings. A black horse moving across distant ridgelines, hoofprints in places no horses had been in years, a flash of purple scarf vanishing between trees. Some said it was just imagination. Others weren't so sure. The park, of course, moved on. Trails were re-cleared. Maps were updated. Visitors kept arriving. But beneath the surface of brochures and welcome signs, her absence lingered quiet, like the wind that never stopped blowing across those frozen ridges. And somewhere deep in the woods, in that vast stretch of silence where time folds in on itself, there's still a space where a woman and her horse disappeared, and where no one, not even the mountain, ever spoke of it again. Not every mystery ends with answers. What happened to Emily Thorne in the summer of 2007 may never be fully known. We have fragments, weathered leather, scattered bones, a scarf, a torn piece of canvas, a fading note, scratched in pencil. We have the silence of 10 years, and then the cruel clarity of a saddle rising from the snow. But what we don't have is the one thing that truly matters. Her. There's something profoundly unsettling about a story that stops mid-sentence. A woman who should have returned. A horse that shouldn't have died alone. A trail that shouldn't have ended in nothing. But the wilderness doesn't work on our terms. Glacier National Park is breathtaking, majestic peaks, crystalline lakes, endless sky. But it's also indifferent. It doesn't notice when someone falls behind. It doesn't remember where you last stood, and it doesn't tell you why it kept your secrets. Maybe that's what haunts people most about Emily's case. She wasn't reckless. She didn't make the classic mistakes. She respected the land. And yet, the land didn't return the favor. Or perhaps it did, in its own quiet way. That torn page found near the shelter, that one final message means she was still fighting, still hoping, still human. Her father passed away in 2021. Before he did, he asked that his ashes be scattered along the same trail Emily rode that final day. Rangers honored his request. And now, somewhere in that vast stretch of pine and snow, both of them remain, together, in the place they both loved and trusted the most. There are those who believe that nature remembers in its own way, that even when it takes, it never forgets. Maybe that's why hikers still report strange things along the ptarmigan trails. The sound of hooves on dry stone, the scent of leather in the wind, a flash of purple disappearing between the trees. Maybe she's still out there, etched into the landscape not as a body, but as a story. One the mountains will tell again and again. In silence, in snow, and in the stillness just before dawn. And maybe, for those who are listening closely, that will be enough. If this story moved you, if you found yourself holding your breath somewhere along the trail of Emily Thorne, we invite you to stay with us. Subscribe to the channel for more true stories, quiet disappearances, haunting clues, and the unanswered questions that linger in the wild corners of our world. Your support helps keep these stories alive. Every like, every share, every comment adds another voice to the search for truth, even when it hides behind the trees. And if you have a story won from your town, your trails, your memory, leave it in the comments. You never know who's listening or watching. Thank you for watching. Stay curious, stay safe. And remember, some trails fade, but the questions remain. Asterisk, asterisk.